Welcome everyone to the 2016 hack.summit. I'm very grateful for everyone to be here today. We're going to have an amazing 3 days together, and this is going to be a very educational experience for developers all across the world to learn from each other. We have 157 countries attending Hack Summit, and over 75,000 developers across the world have chosen to get involved and to learn from each other this week. And I couldn't be more grateful and thrilled with the opportunity to take this journey with you over the next few days. We have an incredible lineup of speakers, over 28 speakers, all of whom are keynote level speakers, which is unprecedented for a programming event. And this entire event is a fundraiser for nonprofits in the coding space. So I will be your host for this week. My name is Ed Roman, and the format of this event is going to be a series of one-on-one video chat sessions between us as the audience, myself, and the speakers. And so it's a new approach to events. It's a pure virtual conference. There is no physical presence for this conference. It's all pure virtual. And so I'd like to begin today by just going over quickly the agenda for today and to talk about some big and important announcements that we have for Hack Summit this year. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And let's go ahead and go through this. So what is the mission of Hack Summit? The mission of Hack Summit is threefold. One is to educate developers around the world. So we have a global audience who will learn from each other. We also want to promote mentorship at Hack Summit. So mentorship means one-on-one education between developers. And I'll go into that a little bit later about how we're achieving that. And then finally, to help raise money for coding nonprofits. So the quick overview of Hack Summit is the event happens from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. The event is being broadcast. I'm personally in San Francisco, California, but the speakers are global. So the speakers are remotely video conferencing in from their locations all over the world, and there's a variety of countries participating in this. All the speakers are technical speakers. So this is a programmer event designed for a hardcore programming audience. However, we don't require that any of our audience members is familiar with any particular technology. We've instructed all of our speakers that for whatever topic they're teaching you, they should explain it from the ground up as if the audience may not be familiar with that particular stack. And so the balance we're trying to strike with Hack Summit is an event that, that caters to the widest possible audience, but is very deeply technical and kind of hardcore so that you'll learn a lot during the event. So here are some of the nonprofits that are involved in the Hack Summit. So one of them is code.org, the Hour of Code initiative. This is an organization that's helping get computer science ingrained in schools in the United States. Code for America is helping to reinvent government and to transform government through electronic processes. We've also got Girls Who Code, Women Who Code, Code Chicks, Black Girls Code, Rails Girls, Summer of Code. These organizations help women, and in Black Girls Code, minority Blacks and Hispanics and Latinos to advance in computer science to help bring diversity to software development. And so diversity is an ongoing theme that you'll see in this event. We also have Code Club, Coder Dojo, and Ada Developers Academy participating this week. And so all of the proceeds from the ticket sales are going to these nonprofits, and you will have the ability to donate to these nonprofits if you see value in this event. So not everyone who's attending Hack Summit today has actually paid a ticket for this event. We decided not to charge a normal registration fee for this event like you would have for a normal conference. A typical conference, I used to run conferences in the past years ago, and we would charge anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000 sometimes for developers to attend our physical conferences. And it was very expensive. And what we realized is that virtual conferences are kind of a new frontier that's been unexplored and hasn't really been transformed by the internet like other businesses have. And so what we decided for this event is let's create value for our audience. Let's have our audience learn from these best speakers in the world. And if you see value, if you decide that you've learned something, then it would be great if you could make a donation of your choice to a coding nonprofit. And that's totally up to you. So we have over 60 partners that are participating in the Hack Summit. And these are some of the largest developer companies in the world. So Stack Overflow, IBM, Upwork, which used to be called Elance and Odesk, Facebook, GitHub, Basecamp, ThoughtWorks, and DZone. And this is just a small sampling of our partners. So what we're hoping for is that this event is kind of a rallying cry for the software development industry, where organizations who may normally compete with each other in the software development space are actually uniting hand in hand this week to help educate developers and to raise money for coding nonprofits. So we really thank you for your support. These organizations have helped promote the event to their audience. They've helped us get registrations. They've helped make contributions to these nonprofits themselves. And so we're really grateful for their inclusion in this event. And so this is the second annual hack.summit. The first event was held about a year ago and had 64,000 developers register for the event. This year, what we've decided to do was to add on a hackathon into the Hack Summit. The hackathon is a weekend-long event where programmers around the world in a virtual manner can collaborate and as teams build projects over that weekend to show off their programming skills and to support coding nonprofits while they're doing it. So it's kind of a feel-good hackathon. And the hackathon just concluded yesterday. So it happened Saturday and Sunday prior to the Hack Summit. And as we are speaking right now, our judges are working furiously to evaluate and judge those projects. And so we're going to be checking in with the progress on the hackathon at the conclusion of the Hack Summit. So on Wednesday, the final session for the Hack Summit is going to be kind of a lessons learned and results of the hackathon, where we'll see some of those projects. We'll talk about them together as a group. We might even vote on some of them that we think are our audience choice for the winners. And I really want to thank coding.com for powering the hackathon. Coding.com is a cloud-based development environment for developers, and they basically sponsored and powered this hackathon. So thank you, coding.com. So here are some of the numbers for Hack Summit. So there's actually over 180,000 registrations. These numbers are actually a little bit out of date. We actually have 180,000 now. 75,000 is actually up to 105,000 for the hackathon, 75,000 for the conference, which basically makes this the largest programming event ever held. So to give you some examples of other programming events, the Game Developers Conference, which is one of the largest physical programming events, happens in San Francisco, California, and there was about 26,000 developers registered for that this year. And that's an event that's been running for almost 20 years now. And so the Hack Summit as a virtual event, you know, we really think that the fact that this is a fundraiser for the nonprofits, that's a feel-good event where we're giving back to the community. The fact that so many people have shown up for the Hack Summit is a testament to the fact that developers around the world really want to help and be good citizens and contribute back. And so thank you for taking a stand with us. We hope that we will inspire other virtual events that others can create based on what we've created here. So we think that there can be an entire industry of virtual events if we're successful here. And we've actually already started to see last year about a dozen or so virtual events being created that were inspired from the Hack Summit. So that's what we'd like to see happen here. So why are we building this virtual event, and why now? What is the background for this? How did we think of this whole thing in the first place? So the very early attempts at virtual conferences were done as 3D virtual worlds. And so you'd have these 3D avatars walking around in a 3D world. And this was done because a lot of folks were kind of used to going to a physical conference where they would interact with attendees in a 3D space, in the real world. And so a lot of the early attempts at technologies for virtual conferences were done to emulate the physical world, to make people feel more comfortable like they were at a conference. So they had these things like trade show booths that were virtual trade show booths. We could go up to the trade show booth and interact with vendors and ask them questions, and it would look like a real exhibit hall at a conference. But what we noticed here is that this may not make as much sense online, because with the internet, it's a different platform. It may not be necessary to clone and replicate what a 3D world might feel like just to make people feel more comfortable. So we kind of boiled it down and we thought, what is the minimum that we need to really succeed to hold a virtual event? And really, The reason why you go to a virtual event is A, to meet people, so you could network, and B, so that you could learn from the speakers. And so that's what we've concluded here in the Hack Summit. So here's how it works. We're basically using two technologies for the Hack Summit. One is we're using Google Hangouts. So you're actually listening to me over Google Hangout right now. And this is actually embedded within a technology called Crowdcast. Crowdcast.io is the name of that company. And this is a startup that we incubated to help essentially create a virtual event for the Hack Summit. And their team is actually with us today, and it's helping to power this event from happening. And with Crowdcast and with Google Hangouts, it just brings this opportunity to an enormous, large crowd of folks around the world. So if you think about it, for a physical conference, think about all the costs that are involved. If you were to go to a physical conference, you'd have to pay for travel expenses, which could cost a few $1,000s for airfare and hotel. You'd have to, as a conference organizer, reserve a set of hotel rooms for your attendees, and you're on the hook financially if nobody shows up. You have to ship out, as an exhibitor, you have to ship out your supplies, so you have to ship out giveaways, and you have to build a trade show booth, ship the trade show booth. Then when everything arrives, there's union labor you have to pay, and the union labor will basically move your exhibit hall booth from the loading dock into the event space, and that costs hundreds or thousands of dollars just to do that little step. Then you got to do return shipping. Then you have to take your entire team off work for a week, so they have to travel, so you're losing downtime. And so the costs just keep adding up, and the fully all-in cost for being an exhibitor at a trade show it's easily $50,000, $100,000 or more if you consider all these little ancillary costs. And then the cost for an attendee, is still in the thousands of dollars because you got to buy the ticket, the travel, all that stuff. And so so we thought, well, in other countries around the world, we've got 157 countries participating today. Why, a lot of them don't have the finances to actually attend a physical conference because of currency differences between the US dollar and their native currency. They're not actually able to attend a lot of the conferences that US citizens enjoy. And so the virtual conference is really a godsend to developers around the world because it allows us collectively as a community to learn from each other regardless of our economic state, regardless of whether we're a student or a professional. No matter who we are, regardless of our background, we can participate together and learn from each other. And that's why we're so excited about this event today. And the fact that that we've got all these great speakers is kind of a testament to this. These speakers, normally, every one of our speakers would deliver a keynote level speech at a physical programming event. But they've decided today that they're going to join hands and do this together with us because they believe in the causes that we're raising for. Some other kind of best practices that we did when we created this event was we actually built a little bit of virality into the event itself. So when you registered for this event, one of the options was if you were not in a financial position to donate, you could just register for free and help us share the event on Facebook and Twitter, which helps us find more donors. And then our secret hope is that maybe if you find value in the event this week, you might choose to donate anyway. And so that also helped make the event successful. So I want to acknowledge a company called Pluralsight, who I work for, which is sponsoring the Hack Summit. So Pluralsight is democratizing professional technology learning. A good, kind of simple analogy for Pluralsight, if you haven't heard of them before, is that they're essentially Netflix for developer education. That's a simplified version of Pluralsight. They're much more than that. But that's a good analogy to kind of get started to understand what Pluralsight is. And Pluralsight essentially is paying for all the costs of the salaries of the folks who are running this event and for the other initiatives that we have that are connected to this event. And so Pluralsight is all about social entrepreneurship. They're the corporate steward behind this event, as well as for two other initiatives, which I'll describe later, which is called HatGuides, which is very exciting. We're actually announcing that today for the very first time at the Hack Summit. And they also sponsor the Hack Pledge, which we'll also go into detail in a few minutes about. Pluralsight has also contributed $20 million in free education for out-of-work professionals in a joint collaboration with the White House. And Pluralsight is also committed to open source, and we're going to actually be open sourcing a project today in this keynote address that developers around the world can participate in. So thank you, Pluralsight. So here's a little bit about me, so you know about my background. So I founded the Hack Summit a year ago. I work for Pluralsight, and I'm also an advisor to about half a dozen startup companies. So I also juggle a little bit of programming with investing in startups. So some of my passions are building startup companies, helping startups succeed, helping developers around the world, take their open source projects and turn startups into them. Those are some of the things that I'm passionate about. And I grew up as a programmer. So I have a computer science degree from Cornell. I wrote a book, many, many years ago. It's very outdated right now, on a technology called Enterprise Java Beans. And I also founded a company called the Middleware Company and the Serverside.com. So the Serverside.com is the world's largest independent Java developer community. There's over 500,000 developers who have registered for the Serverside.com. And for the Middleware Company, it's a training and consulting company that specializes in Java programming. And so this is about 10, 15 years ago that we built these businesses. Then more recently, I became CEO of a company called HackHands, which is an on-demand mentoring programming company for programmers. So the problem we tried to solve at HackHands is if you need programming advice, we could provide real-time experts to help you solve your programming problems. And that company was acquired by Pluralsight last year, and the Hack Summit is now part of Pluralsight as well. And then finally, I started a video game development studio called Ghostfire Games, which made exercise video games for the Nintendo Wii systems. That's one of my other passions, is how do you make exercise fun? So real quick, I want to acknowledge the Hack Summit team. So you've got Harrison Kratz, who's the Director of Event Partnerships for the Hack Summit. So Harrison helped us line up a lot of the companies that are involved in the Hack Summit and set up a lot of those business development relationships which were critical for success. We've got Paulo Check, and Paulo is the back-end developer that built and maintained some of the technologies behind the Hack Summit. Sierra Del Norte handled social media for us and meetup.com outreach. And then Pranay Mohan helped with some of our speaker logistics. I'd also like to acknowledge the folks who helped last year with the Hack Summit: Forrest Good, Geraldo Ramos, Assis Antunes, Fernando Rocha, and Hugo Rodriguez. That team helped last year's Hack Summit and helped the original foundation of the event. So thank you guys. And then we have a variety of advisors and contributors to the Hack Summit. So this event was quite a production. We've got Sai Hussein, the founder of Crowdcast, and Damien Madre, who is the founder of Honey and who did the design for the Hack Summit. We've got the folks I just mentioned there that I acknowledged in the previous slide. The PR for this event was performed by Triple Point PR. We also have Tom Chi, the creator of Google Glass, who's an advisor to the event. Alistair Kroll is an advisor. He authored the book Lean Analytics. Frank Greco, Floyd Marinescu, Bruce Tate, Maddie Dory, D-Zone, Workshape.io, and Pluralsight were all involved. So now I'd like to talk about the Hack Pledge. So what is the Hack Pledge? So the Hack Pledge, in order to give you some background about this, I'm going to tell you a personal story. So when I first started learning how to program, I was, probably a little kid learning how to program just because I was inspired to learn how to make video games. This is many, many years ago. And as I evolved as a programmer, I got more into business programming. And a few years ago, I realized I wasn't up to date on the latest programming technologies. And so I decided to teach myself Ruby on Rails. And it was actually quite a challenge for me to learn Ruby on Rails, because I realized that some of the programming paradigms that I had learned in Java and J2EE were no longer as applicable in modern programming environments. And so I actually got stuck quite a bit. The whole convention over configuration paradigm that Rails has was kind of new to me, and it baffled me at first. And I struggled as a programmer. I was having a hard time debugging. I was on Stack Overflow searching Google a lot for answers. And it was really, really tough for me. And I didn't have anyone to ask questions to. So I didn't have a peer group of programmers that was around me. I was working from home, like a lot of programmers do, without a great programmer social network around me. And so my productivity was very, very low when I first learned how to program in Rails. It was very hard for me. And so I spent probably, I would guess, about 80% of my time being stuck rather than actually writing original code. And I don't think this is just to me. So I started researching this. I got very curious about this. And I found that the average developer across the world writes between 10 and 20 lines of fully debugged and tested code per year, which is an outrageously low number. Now, there's a lot of reasons behind this. A lot of this comes from the Mythical Man Month book, a landmark book in computer science. Part of the reasons is because of parallelization between programmers, communication needed, the fact that you might need to refactor code over time. This is, the average is actually higher for startups and for independent projects, but for larger projects, that weighs the average down a little bit. And only about 10 to 20% of time is spent writing original code. And many developers, kind of like I did when I first learned Rails, resort to trial and error to fix these programming problems. So, what I've seen a lot of programmers do, which I did at first as well, is we would just, try to copy and paste solutions rather than thinking about, from the Socratic method, what is the real way to solve this problem? And so a lot of programmers don't really learn the right way to solve it. Mark Zuckerberg's been quoted saying that there's up to 100 times productivity difference between an average programmer and a great programmer. And that's pretty absurd. If you look at other industries, that difference is not there. So for example, you look at architects, or if you look at lawyers, for example, right? In those industries, a great lawyer is not 100 times more productive than an average lawyer. So I kind of think that this might be an artifact of our industry that we might even be able to correct over time. It's not going to be immediate, but we might be able to make progress in this regard. And so the way the companies solve this problem is in a very unique way. So, there's predicted to be 1 million unfulfilled programming jobs by 2020, which is a $500 billion opportunity. That's how much is being lost there. And the way that companies solve this problem today is that they steal developers from one another. So company A will steal a developer from company B, trying to poach them. But that doesn't really help the world, because then one company loses, another company wins. And it's also expensive, because companies hire these expensive recruiters, and the recruiters will be hired to poach these other developers. And then as you grow the development team gets less efficient, and there's more liability from a headcount perspective for the company, more communication needed. The most efficient team for a programmer would be just one person. And then every time you add another person to that team, it actually increases the parallelization needed. So stealing developers is not the ideal solution. So here's some other issues that we've also noticed. Diversity is a big issue in programming today. Only 2% of the open source is contributed by women today. And in 2013, the states of Mississippi, Montana, and Wyoming had 0 girls, Hispanics, or African Americans even attempt to take the advanced placement computer science exam. In 33 out of 50 states, computer science classes don't even count towards high school math or science graduation requirements. And you can get very easily discouraged as a programmer when you're first learning, when you're first starting out as a kid. Because if you don't have access to a mentor group who can mentor you as a peer, if you don't have friends who are also programmers and you get stuck, then that might be the time that you decide in your mind, hey, programming's not for me, I'm not going to become a programmer. And that may change your entire career path for the rest of your life. So discouragement can happen very, very easily. So I believe that mentoring can help solve this problem. If we help each other through mentoring, when we have our our hour of need, when we're struggling, when we're stuck, then we might be able to increase the speed of programmers in real time. You can imagine if a programmer got stuck and didn't have to spend 80% of their time on the same silly programming problem for days at a time. And we've all been there. We've all been in that situation where something silly gets us stuck. Even the best programmers in the world experience this, right? It's not just new programmers. Everyone does. Then we could keep ourselves productive. We could reduce stealing from developers from one another because of mentoring. And we could improve diversity among developers by having them in their hour of need get help from someone else without having a mentor peer group. So one of the small ways that we're trying to make an impact on this problem is through this initiative called the Hack Pledge. So what is the Hack Pledge? The Hack Pledge is a movement for us to give or receive 1 hour of free programming help. That's all it is. It's just an hour of your time to give or receive, or both. And the idea is that we can help each other master the craft of software development together. So we can help each other become better programmers, faster, more efficient, and not be stuck as much. This is useful for new and experienced programmers. Even experienced programmers could use an hour of help when they're stuck on something silly. And so 1 hour might not seem like a lot of time, but it actually adds up over time. Because if you think about a large community of us together, rallying together and actually helping each other program, then this can actually make a significant impact around the world. And our secret hope is that we will actually enjoy the process of mentoring and want to do it more, just because we want to. And so the website for this is hack.summit.org. So if you go to hack.summit.org, you can check out the Hack Pledge, and you can volunteer to be a mentor there. And so we're going to be rolling out the Hack Pledge this year in a few months. So we're going to be collecting signatures for the next couple of months. Then later in the year, we're going to be kind of unveiling that and connecting mentors to mentees. So I hope that everyone has a chance to participate in this. We've had over 10,000 developers participate in this last year. Here are some of the organizations that are supporting the Hack Pledge. So this is, kind of the who's who of both coding nonprofits as well as technology organizations that have decided to ally themselves with the Hack Pledge. And then there's many speakers at the Hack Summit who have also pledged as well. Some of our famous keynote speakers have decided, hey, I know my time is valuable, but I'm going to give back to the Hack Pledge and help out. So that's the Hack Pledge. So now I'd like to talk about the next initiative that we have launching. And this is actually brand new to this year for the Hack Summit. And I'm very, very excited about this. It's called hack.guides. So what is this all about? Well, let's start with the problem. What is the problem we're trying to solve with HatGuides? So the problem we're trying to solve here is the problem of technical blog content. So today, technical blog content exists on individual developers around the world on their blogs. And a lot of developers use WordPress as their technology for technical blog content. And we actually tried to use WordPress quite a bit at HackHands, at my previous company. And we actually struggled with it quite a bit because WordPress isn't like the most developer-friendly platform for writing technical blog content. We found that doing things like code blocks wasn't super intuitive. You had to install these custom plugins for that. There was no way to do peer review of technical content in WordPress. It wasn't really built with developers in mind. You couldn't collaborate on posts as easily as we would like. The content didn't quite reach the widest possible audience. A lot of content is kind of stranded on individual blogs that don't really have a lot of reach, and not a lot of people find that content. And so we think that just kind of surfacing and making that content more visible would be interesting, so that when people search Google and the results pop up, then the best content comes up, not just the ones that come from the highest traffic sites. We also noticed that technical blog content has maintenance problems. Like it's hard to maintain technical content sometimes because you get busy and you write a blog post about some technology subject, you explain a tutorial on some programming topic, and then you get busy. And then what happens is that there's a new version of that technology that comes out, a new library. And when that happens, the technical content is not maintained. And so it becomes out of date and stale. And then that misleads future programmers. They go down the path of following your tutorial, and they find halfway through that it doesn't work, and they've just wasted some of their time. So, so I don't like that. And then the other problem that I've noticed is that a lot of the content is not accessible in other languages. So a lot of technical content is written in the English language, but that's not super accessible to other programmers who may not have fully mastered the English language in other countries. So that's some of the problems we've identified with technical content. And so we're making an attempt, this is an experiment here, just an experiment that we're launching here today called hack.guides to help solve some of these technical blog content issues. So this initiative, the way you can think about this in a simple way is that hack.guides is kind of like a Wikipedia for technical knowledge. Another way you can think about this is it's kind of like medium.com for developers. So medium.com is a blogging platform that folks around the world use. It's very popular. It's got great design. And both programmers and non-programmers use medium.com today. So we basically made kind of an attempt at something like that, but for developers, essentially. And so essentially, this is a content management system, or CMS, which would be analogous to WordPress, Drupal, those types of technologies. But it's unique for developers for a few reasons. One is that the file format for this technology is built using Markdown. So Markdown, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a very simple file format that developers use for kind of communicating with other developers. For example, if you go to GitHub and you look at a README file for most repositories, the README file is written using Markdown. And Markdown is a very, very easy to learn file format. It uses very simple ASCII representation for formatting, and is very unintrusive. So that's the file format. So as a developer, I love Markdown, so that makes sense. And then we store the articles instead of storing it in a database or a private repository, that's proprietary. We actually store the articles in GitHub. So basically, the articles themselves are in a repository on GitHub. So GitHub is the storage mechanism for these articles, and then we've got this engine that visualizes on the web these articles. So that's basically what hack.guides is. It's all three of these things. It's basically the engine that visualizes it on the web. It's the storage of the articles in GitHub, and Markdown is the file format. So, this is a little typo here. So our mission with HatGuides is that creating articles should be a joy for developers. And so you can use your favorite text editor to create articles in HatGuides. You can use VI, Emacs, you can use Text Wrangler, whatever your favorite text editor or IDE is. You can actually edit articles in that environment. And you can basically check in articles using Git pull requests. You can actually edit and maintain articles that way. Or if you don't want to deal with Git or your own editor, then you can actually edit articles on GitHub, or you can edit it visually on the web with this editor that we basically provide for you as well. And so some of the benefits of this initiative that we're hoping that the community will receive from this is that you could get your articles peer-reviewed to improve quality. So the whole idea is with GitHub as the underlying engine for storing articles, that you can actually work with other developers to make articles better. And they can collaborate on the site, on GitHub, or in their favorite editors. And then other developers can help maintain your guides in the long term. Because the editing process and the collaboration process is so simple, it's based on Git pull requests. If you get busy and the technologies are evolving and you don't have time to maintain your article, then someone else can maintain it. Just like it works on Wikipedia. Same kind of idea there. And then we hope that as a community, we can help provide kind of a voice for each other. So that if there's a developer out there who's written a technical article, and that developer may not have a lot of reach with his community, then maybe as a community, we can help promote each other's articles to surface and get more visibility for content. And then in the future, and this is what I'm really excited about today, is the idea of bringing this technical content to other spoken languages. So the vision here, this is a very long-term vision, so it's not going to happen right away. But down the road, we see this playing out, assuming that we're successful here. My hope is that there may be volunteers out there that are so passionate about their country, their spoken language, that they may be willing to help translate content, so that we can bring kind of this content to languages around the world who may not have mastered English. And so together, we hope that we can make each other better developers. And the best thing about this initiative is that it's 100% free and it's all open source. So everything I just described is free for anyone to use in any capacity that they want to. So the engine itself is open source and it's on GitHub for anyone to play with. You can actually set it up on your own website if you want to. The articles are stored in GitHub, and the articles are in an open source repository. The articles are owned by the original author. So they don't give up their rights to the articles, but they do store them in this repository. So we have a reference implementation of this that's live today that Pluralsight has agreed to host at pluralsight.com/guides. And so I'm going to take you there right now. So let's go ahead and copy and paste this URL. And I'm going to stop sharing that screen. And I'm now going to share a browser. And so this is kind of our official launch of this project. We're really excited about it. This is what HackGuides looks like. Now, the first thing to notice is on the top left of this screen, you'll see that it says hack.guides beta. So that's intentional. This is a beta. This is an experiment. And we're hoping to get feedback from the community to help improve this. So, we're hoping to involve the community together. We've actually created a Slack channel for this, where you can come and join us and hang out with us on Slack and give us feedback for this project for how we can make it better. So what you're seeing here on the homepage is essentially a visualization of articles that are stored in GitHub. So this is a list of articles written by GitHub contributors. So the login for this site uses GitHub. The authors have their names and avatars pulled from GitHub, and you see their GitHub call sign for each of the articles here. You can also filter by stacks here. So you can pick Java or J2EE, C++, Python, etc. And you can only look at the articles that you want to look at based on your stack. And by the way, there's about a 20-second delay with Crowdcast between when I speak and when you're actually going to see what's on screen. So what I show you on screen may not exactly match up to what I'm saying in terms of timing. Just keep that in mind. That's just a limitation of Google Hangouts that we're working through for future years as this virtual event evolves. So let's go on to the bottom here of this website. So what is this website about? This website is a developer community for writing guides. It's a community for collaborating on creating great technical guides. Our collective aim is by working together, we can educate the world and improve our knowledge. It integrates with GitHub, it uses Markdown as the file format, and the engine is open source. So let's go ahead and take a look at what this looks like. So let's click on an article. Let's go ahead and click on Angular.js modules and providers. So this is what the article looks like. So the article essentially is, it uses code blocks in a very easy to use way. It's just a visualization of Markdown. And as you scroll down this article, you can choose to get free email updates, which means you can get more content sent to you. And there's a discussion thread at the bottom where people can comment and improve each other's articles. But then on the left, there's a link where you can just edit this guide right here, just like you would do on Wikipedia. So if you click Edit the Guide, you then get put into this Markdown editor. And on the Markdown editor, you can actually see the original Markdown for this guide. And then there's a handy dandy visualization tool where you can see a Markdown preview of this content as well, so that you can actually see what it'll look like in its final form. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the GitHub repositories for this system. So this is the repository. There might be a little bit delay here when you see this. Here's a repository that has each of the folders for, and each folder is an article essentially for this community. And so anyone can contribute to this repository. And then there's a separate repository for all of the engine code that's behind the website. And so what's really cool about this is that you can actually edit this on GitHub. So let's go ahead and try editing it on GitHub. So I'll click on the article again, and then I'll view the article on GitHub, which opens the article in a new tab. And then when the video catches up, you'll see this. You'll see a GitHub view where you actually see the Markdown file on GitHub, and you can actually edit the file on GitHub. And when you do that, it actually updates it on the main homepage. So that's kind of the overview of HatGuides. Again, this is an experiment, but we're hoping it'll add value to the community. You can post articles on this reference implementation site, or you can take the code and the engine that we've built for free and use it yourself in whatever way you want to. It's all open sourced. So we're pretty excited about HatGuides. We hope that that'll improve developer knowledge around the world, bring it to other countries, help maintenance, help collaboration. There's a lot of benefits. So hopefully it'll go well. Please join our Slack. The way that you can contribute to this project, by the way, you could make an article on this website. You can actually contribute to the engine code. You can just give us feedback on Slack. You can help us promote the projects that others know about it. Any of those would be greatly appreciated, so we can learn as much as we can from this experiment and make this a useful resource for the community. So that's HatGuides. I'm going to go ahead and close this now. I'm going to stop screen sharing that. All right, and let's go ahead and share PowerPoint again, and we'll wrap this up. Okay. So I want to quickly acknowledge the HatGuides team, Pratik Gupta and Luke Lee. You guys have been amazing. Thank you so much for contributing to HatGuides. It's making a difference for everyone out there. And so this is the URL for HatGuides, pluralsight.com/guides. So go there if you want to help us with HatGuides. We'd really, really appreciate it. You can also email pratik-gupta@pluralsight.com if you have any questions or if you want to get involved in other ways. And so there's lots of ways you can help. You know, we hope that everyone chooses to get involved in this and help make this a success for the community. And then there's one final initiative that we're experimenting with this year at the Hack Summit, which is that as a free community service, we're actually helping developers find their dream job at the Hack Summit. So if you're a new developer, if you're a developer who's looking for a new career, or if you are a new developer, let's say you're a student looking to get into the industry, you know, whatever your background is, we're doing a small experiment here where we help connect employers with engineers at the Hack Summit. And so again, you know, just set expectations. This is the first time we've done this, so there might be a few hitches, but we're kind of, you know, secretly hopeful that we'll make a difference for programmers out there. And so we've created a website for this, which is hacksummit.workshape.io. And this website is a place where you can go to help find a career at the Hack Summit. So hopefully that'll be useful for engineers out there in the audience. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. So now it's about 8:42 a.m. in San Francisco right now. We've got about 15 minutes left to answer questions from the audience. So using Crowdcast, you can actually ask questions and you can upvote each other's questions in Crowdcast. And we did that intentionally because we think that normally at a physical programming conference, the most vocal audience members are those who actually get preference for asking questions. But their questions might not be the best questions to be answered. So we thought, well, you know, what if we have audience upvoting of questions? That might be a more democratic way to see what questions are the best questions. So that's what we've kind of done here at the Hack Summit. And we also have polls where you can actually answer polls that we've created, where we can basically ask you questions back. And then one other interaction that we're introducing at the Hack Summit is the ability for you to actually meet the speakers. So after each session is over, we're asking each speaker if they can carve out maybe 30 minutes or so to talk with you in video chat, where you actually get to join the Hangout and talk to them and ask them questions. And that kind of replicates the kind of beehive effect that happens at a real physical programming conference after a speaker is done speaking. And so, you know, not every speaker is gonna have the time to do this, since the speakers are on very tight schedules, but some of them will have time to do this. And if they do have time, we're gonna paste a link to the Hangout itself in the chat session, and you'll be able to join and talk to the speaker at the chat session. So let's go through a few of the questions that the audience has asked here for me, and then we'll take a break and we'll go right into our first session, which is with Brian Fox, who created the GNU Bash shell and maintained Emacs. He's an incredible, incredible speaker. We're gonna do a wonderful fireside chat together, one of our best speakers last year. And so I hope everyone has a chance to join us. We have an incredible lineup for the rest of the day. It's gonna be a lot of fun. So let's go ahead and answer some of these questions. So the first question, will the live sessions be recorded for later viewing? If yes, where can we find them? So that's a great question. And so the answer to that is yes, the live sessions will be recorded. And in fact, they're recorded and made available almost immediately within Crowdcast. There's a slight delay because of YouTube's infrastructure, which is really what's behind Hangouts and Crowdcast. But once that YouTube infrastructure has processed things, then you'll actually be able to view the sessions inside of Crowdcast. So if you miss a session, it's no big deal. You can see the sessions later. You'll just lose the opportunity to interact with the speakers and with the polls and the Q&A and the chat because of that. Okay, so next question is, what's the best thing to learn in 2016? So that's a great question, and I think that depends on you. It depends on your background and where you are as a developer. You know, so for some developers, they're just getting started as a programmer. You know, they might be a student learning how to code. If you're on mobile, I might steer more towards Objective-C than, for example, more towards Swift than Objective-C, given Apple's kind of transition in that way. If you're on the web, then some of the newer technologies that I'm personally excited about. You know, I'm a big fan of Node.js. I've been tinkering a little bit with Meteor.js. It's still a bit early for me for that. Those are my personal preferences, but I think as developers out there, it's going to really depend on you. Now, if you're an open source developer and you're thinking about, for example, creating a business someday off of open source, then something to learn might be a little bit of business sense about how you can actually create a successful business as an independent developer. And so we'll be talking a little bit about that throughout the week too, about how you can succeed as either an independent contractor or as an entrepreneur as a developer. So next question. What do you listen to while you are programming? So I'm kind of old school in this regard. So I still have this MP3 collection from years ago. And so, I'm not using Spotify these days, even though I probably should, right? I'm still stuck with my legacy MP3 collection. And so it's a variety of like 80s music, 90s music, I'm also into house, techno, that kind of stuff. That's a good rhythm when you're programming. So it's a great question. Next question is, what will be the next big change in the development environment? So that's a really great question. There's been a trend recently and there's actually been two trends happening in parallel. So one of the trends that you've seen is that IDEs have now moved to the cloud. So you've got coding.com, Cloud9, CodeEnvy, Code Anywhere. These are examples of web-based development environments. And the value proposition of these products is that you can collaborate in the web with other developers, and they don't have to reconfigure their IDEs every time because you're sharing common configuration settings. So that hopefully that'll save time as the year goes on, and you're programming together as a team. So that's one big trend. But then there's been a counter trend to that, which is that a lot of developers that used to be using IDEs, that are desktop IDEs, are now using more like simple text editors. I see it a lot in the developers that I work with. A lot of developers prefer the simplicity of just a simple text editor plus the command line, which is kind of how I grew up as a developer. So I think that those two opposite trends will continue to happen. And I think it really depends on you as a developer for what your preferences are, because these are all just paths to achieve the same result, to build a successful project, and it all really depends on your personal preferences. Okay, so we answered that one. So what are the best programming resources you have ever used? What are some of the best hacking books you've read? Suggest the best web pages to stay up to date with technology, cybersecurity, hacking, networking trends. So that's a great question. So one of my favorite books is this book called Essential Calm, and it was written by a fellow named Don Box. And this book is it's probably about 20 years old by now, and it's such a great book as a programmer. The first chapter of that book is unbelievable because it is a book that teaches you how the Microsoft Calm system was evolved from C++. And in order to really fully understand that first chapter, you have to be able to have a good grasp of how pointers work, pointer arithmetic, things like that. This is a lot of stuff that developers don't really deal with as much these days with some of the more modern languages. But to understand what's really happening under the hood, it's a great text for that. The first chapter, I would say, it's going to take you a while to digest that first chapter, but it's totally worth it. So the book is called Essential Calm by Don Box. Another book I might recommend is a book by Christopher Alexander, which is called The Timeless Way of Building. So Christopher Alexander is an architect. He's not a programmer. He's a guy who understands how physical cities are built, and he wrote a book on that, about these patterns for how to build cities. So, best practices for how cities should be built. So a good example is, if you're building a community of houses that share a common area like a lawn, for example, then those families may tend to interact with each other and their kids might play together. So that's a good best practice for building a community among community members within a neighborhood. So he wrote this book quite a while ago, decades ago. And then these programmers noticed this book, The Timeless Way of Building. And by the way, he wrote another book too. He wrote several books actually on architecture. And the programmers noticed these books and they said, hey, some of these best practices, some of these patterns might be applicable to programming. like what if there's symmetries and analogies between architecture and programming? And so, so the design patterns that we know about in programming, a lot of them were kind of inspired by the idea of these design patterns that Christopher Alexander wrote in his book. In fact, even the format for how he writes these design patterns, the style and the syntax, where he, the way that he writes each pattern up, that style is called the Alexandrian form. And that's used today in how design patterns are written up. And so I highly recommend, for historical reasons, that everyone takes a look at this book, The Timeless Way of Building, because it's a great kind of historical context for how this happened. And it's kind of a funny story, because Christopher Alexander, after all this inspiration was happening, Christopher Alexander, this is all a rumor, right? But he was rumored to have spoken at this conference called Uppsala, where the programmers wanted to honor him at this conference. And he spoke and delivered a keynote there after all the programmers have created all these design patterns based on him. And in his opening keynote, he's like, I don't know what all your programmers are kind of doing here. I'm just an architect. So it's kind of a funny kind of climax to all of that. So anyway, I really like Christopher Alexander. I like the design patterns he's created. It's taught me a lot. That's a great book to read. And I'll give you one more book to read before we end this question. So this is more of a business book. So this book helped me out when I was first a programmer at my first job. So my first job out of college, I worked at a company called Trilogy in Austin, Texas in the United States. And the CEO of this company gave a copy of this book to everyone. And it was called How to Be a Star at Work. And I read that book and it really made an impact on me. There were concepts in that book that I didn't really think about as a programmer. Like, for example, the idea of being in the critical path for the company. So like whatever initiative, the project that the company, is strategic to the company's future, to try to piggyback on those projects. Like little best practices like that really helped me in my early career. So, if there's programmers out there that are in their first jobs as a programmer, you might want to read How to Be a Star at Work. Okay, so next question, what programming language do you use? So for my video game development studio, I created a game using C++. And C++ is still the language that game developers use. It hasn't really evolved much, at least for desktop games. This is built for the Nintendo Wii system. So that's what I use for games. And then for web development, I've used Ruby on Rails, Node.js, Java, J2EE. And those are all, I'm fans of all those stacks. Okay, last question that we'll take here before we have to move on is, why did you create the Hack Summit? So that's a really good question. So the Hack Summit was created for many reasons. One is that from a personal perspective, I like for any project that I get involved in to have both economic viability as well as social entrepreneurship. So what that basically means is the idea of building a business that could be financially self-sufficient, where you pay for salaries of employees, but also gives back and helps the world in some way. That's personally near and dear to me. I think if you spend your entire life chasing money, then you'll retire, with hopefully with a lot of money. But then, if you think about the day that you die, you would trade every cent that you have left in the bank for one more day on this earth. And so you can't take the money with you. And so what impact are you going to make during the time that you're actually here today? And so what a lot of people do is they'll spend their career accumulating wealth, and then when they get older, they'll try to figure out, what is the purpose in life? Why, what is the meaning of life now that I've done all this? And they decide to give some of that wealth back to charity. So that kind of seemed kind of silly. Like, why would you spend your whole life chasing money and then give money back to charity? Like, what if the life that you're living today could involve some sort of give back as you're living your life? So that's kind of why I like social entrepreneurship, is because it's a way to give back while you create something. So the Hack Summit and the Hack Pledge and HatGuides, all those projects kind of embody that for me. It's kind of a way to give back to society while kind of building something that may be economically sustainable. For us, originally we had a mentoring company called Hack Hands. And we thought that building these projects may help us in other ways to build our Hack Hands business. Maybe people would get to know Hack Hands a little bit better because we were the corporate stewards for these projects, for example. And now that we're part of Pluralsight, Pluralsight has the same social entrepreneurship mission that we do. And so it's a real thrill for us to collaborate with them. And so that's kind of the motivation behind the Hack Summit, is how do you give back in your own unique way? And so what the Hack Pledge, for example, represents is a way for developers to give back and help others that's a little bit different than the way they would normally give back. So the way that a developer, the way that someone might give back in real life is they might help the homeless, they might kind of do kind of a food drive, that kind of stuff. And those are all great initiatives. Fully support them. I've done those and I love doing those. But some developers want to give back using their own skills, as a developer, to help other developers. And that's kind of what the Hack Pledge is all about. And that's what the HatGuides is all about as well, where we can help each other learn as developers. So that's kind of the motivation, and just the feeling of helping these nonprofits. They're all on such important missions that I think the chance for us to make an impact, to help diversity in the world, to help transform government, that's a meaningful mission that I think we can all get behind. So that's all the time we have for questions. So in a few minutes, we're going to be back with Brian Fox. We're going to have a great fireside chat with him. I hope this was educational and informative. Check out HatGuides, check out the pledge, and I hope you guys have a great time with me over the next 3 days. We're going to have a wonderful time together as a community. Thank you for participating today in the Hack Summit. You're going to have a great day. So look forward to chatting with you in a few minutes. Let's take a break. We'll be back soon.